Before the freeways, shopping centers, warehouses, and a seemingly endless sea of rooftops, the Southwest Valley was primarily farmland, much of it growing cotton. Here and there, a small town cropped up among the cotton fields: Tolleson, Avondale, Goodyear, and Litchfield Park. In early 1986, the population of Avondale was around 9,700, about 1/10 of its current population. Goodyear had about 4,600 residents, and Tolleson 4,400. Litchfield Park didn't record any census figures because it wouldn't incorporate as a city until 1987. An economic development boom hadn't come to the West Valley like it had in the East Valley. Interstate 10 wasn't complete between 27th Avenue and Central Avenue in downtown Phoenix, making the region undesirable to most land developers. With hardly any major employers in the West Valley, prospective homebuyers would have to drive east for work. Commuting on surface roads could be a nightmare. Besides, a large chunk of West Valley land couldn't be developed because it was tied up in Goodyear farms. In the early 20th century, the emergence of pneumatic tires revolutionized transportation. However, such tires required high-grade, long fiber cotton to toughen their fabric against the rough roads of the era. Long staple cotton was developed in the late 1800s in Egypt. It required a longer growing season and drier climate than the southern U.S. states could offer. The sources of such cotton were Egypt and the sea islands off Georgia's coast. German U-boats put a stop to cotton imports, and a boll weevil infestation took out the sea island crops. It was then that Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company, based in Akron, Ohio, cast its eyes upon the deserts of Arizona as a potential haven for cotton cultivation. Enter Paul Weeks Litchfield, an ambitious Goodyear executive entrusted with the mission of sparking the interest of Arizona farmers in the prospects of cotton cultivation. While his attempts to convince local farmers to cultivate cotton proved fruitless, Litchfield managed to convince Goodyear's top executives to acquire farmland so the company could grow its own cotton. In January 1917, Goodyear Tire and Rubber embarked on its ambitious endeavor of converting 16,000 acres of native desert into a thriving cotton-producing property at what would one day become the cities of Litchfield Park and Goodyear. The timing proved fortuitous for the company. Later that year, the United States entered the war in Europe. The U.S. military needed rubber products for everything from airplane tires to observation balloons and blimps. To sustain the cotton production enterprise, a labor camp emerged at the intersection of Indian School and Dysart Roads, aptly named Algodon, which is Spanish for cotton. Following a series of name changes, the community eventually settled on Litchfield Park. The start of World War II brought more growth to the area. In the summer of 1941, months before the U.S. entered World War II, Del E. Webb Construction Company built Luke Field as a training base for Army Air Corps fighter pilots. That same year, the tire company began operations at Goodyear Aircraft, renamed Goodyear Aerospace in 1963. To house the workers, Webb built a community of single-family homes near Western Avenue and Litchfield Road. In 1944, the resident employees voted to name the community Goodyear. The small rural communities flourished for 70 years under the tire company's protective wing, or winged foot as the case may be. But the West Valley wasn't just a sea of cotton fields, and Goodyear Tire and Rubber wasn't the only big player calling the shots. A man named Colonel Dale Bumstead had a vision. At his Talwiwi Ranch, tucked along Litchfield Road and Olive Avenue, he turned the Arizona desert into a thriving agricultural empire, growing dates, citrus, cattle, and most famously, grapes. His grapes were no ordinary harvest. Talwiwi Ranch became world-renowned for its quality, with Arizona highways calling Bumstead a self-taught farming scientist. His methods, innovative for their time, set the stage for what farming in the desert could truly achieve. By the 1980s, the ranch had become something of a community treasure. Once the Perlette and Thompson seedless grapes were picked for market, the farm opened its gates, inviting locals to comb the vineyards for any leftovers. For many, it became a cherished seasonal ritual. Nearby fields brimmed with onions, potatoes, and melons. Back in the 1950s, Tolleson earned the nickname Vegetable Center of the World. From its packing stations, rail cars carried fresh produce to tables across the nation. Another agricultural product the West Valley produced was wool. Around the dawn of the 20th century, Basque immigrants began arriving in the region. These skilled shepherds, hailing from the rugged Basque country of Spain and France, brought with them centuries-old traditions of sheep grazing and management. Out on the open desert landscape, they forged a way of life, forming close-knit communities and building a sheep industry that became a cornerstone of the local economy. It wasn't easy. The harsh conditions of the desert tested their mettle, but their expertise made all the difference. Over time, as the sheep industry waned, so too did the prominence of the Basque shepherds. But their influence lingers, woven into the cultural and historical fabric of the West Valley. The last day of 1986 signaled coming changes to the West Valley's pastoral lifestyle. To fend off a hostile takeover by European industrialist James Goldsmith, Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company sold a whopping 12,000 acres in and around Litchfield Park to Suncor Development Company, part of the AZP Group, which incidentally are the same folks who own Arizona Public Service Company. This sale kick-started a wave of development that would ripple across the entire Southwest Valley. About 6 months before Suncor's big announcement on New Year's Eve 1986, Phoenix real estate developer Charles H. Keating Jr. made his own move. He convinced the Goodyear City Council to annex nearly 9,000 acres in the Estrella Mountains south of the Gila River for a new community he had in mind. While Suncor got to work on its massive Palm Valley project, Keating had big dreams for Estrella Mountain Ranch, predicting it would house 300,000 people by the year 2000. But those dreams got overshadowed pretty quickly by the infamous savings and loan scandal that rocked the late 1980s. Keating, at the center of it all, was running Lincoln Savings and Loan, which had been making risky bets on projects like Estrella Mountain Ranch. When those bets started going south, the whole thing unraveled, exposing shady financial practices and sending shockwaves through the entire U.S. economy. By 1989, Lincoln Savings and Loan had gone belly up, costing taxpayers a staggering $3.4 billion, one of the biggest financial disasters in American history. Keating didn't just lose his empire, he got hit with fraud and racketeering charges. In 1991, he was convicted on 17 counts, and the scandal even splashed mud on several U.S. senators, including Arizona's John McCain and Dennis DeConcini, in what became known as the Keating 5 scandal. Otherwise, life went on as usual. Every year, Avondale celebrated its Founders Day, Billy Moore Days. Tolleson turned out for annual Whoopie Days, and Litchfield Park had Christmas in the Park. Sadly, Goodyear didn't have any special days. The communities held pageants including Miss Billy Moore Days, Miss Western Maricopa County, which was affiliated with the Miss America pageant, and Mr. Westside, a comedic beauty pageant for men which raised money to build a shelter for domestic violence victims. On the sports front, Avondale annexed Phoenix International Raceway in 1990, a move Raceway officials claimed took them by surprise, and they weren't too happy about it. But PIR wasn't Avondale's only sports claim to fame. The city was also home to the Grand Canyon Game Club, Arizona's largest cockfighting arena. Yes, cockfighting was legal in this state until 1998. On tournament weekends, many local restaurants unfurled banners welcoming cockfighters. They also welcomed the 5,000 to 7,000 knights and ladies who showed up for the annual Estrella War in Estrella Mountain Regional Park. The Society for Creative Anachronism organized the event, which pitted the kingdoms of Cade and Attenvelt against each other in mock medieval warfare. Knights weren't the only ones drawn to the county park. Cowboys flocked to the Estrella Rodeo Arena for multiple rodeos, including the Southwest Rodeo Association, the Goodyear Estrella Rodeo, and the Law Enforcement Association Rodeo. In August 1989, more than 2.5 years after it bought Goodyear Farms, Suncor informed the Goodyear City Council it planned to start construction of the first phase of its Litchfield development by fall of that year. Phase 1 would consist of 6,000 new homes north of I-10. In January 1990, Suncor was ready to start building the infrastructure: roads, sewers, water lines. But first it had to create what is known as a Community Facilities District, or CFD. Suncor President John Ogden explained to a View reporter that a CFD allows a developer to pledge land as collateral and to use tax-exempt financing to raise money to build the infrastructure for utilities. Only one obstacle stood in Suncor's way. State law required a vote of approval by the residents living within a proposed CFD. Since the land in question previously had been home to nothing more than cotton plants, Suncor moved 3 mobile homes onto a lot at Litchfield and Indian School Roads and invited 6 people to live in the trailers long enough to be qualified to vote in a $166 million bond election. The bond passed, and Suncor stood poised on the brink of changing the face of the West Valley forever. In November of 1990, Suncor announced it was in negotiations with Sun Lakes developer Robeson Communities on a deal to build an 8,000 resident retirement community in Goodyear. The concept of Pebble Creek was born. In other news, Glendale car dealer Ev Meekum was elected governor in a 3-way race and assumed the office in January 1987. The following year, the state Senate voted to impeach him and he was removed from office. Among the charges against Meekum was that he transferred governor's funds to his car dealership. Secretary of State Rose Mofford, famous for her beehive hairstyle and grandmotherly manner, assumed the office of governor in February of 1988. In April, she was the keynote speaker at the annual dinner of the Avondale Goodyear Litchfield Park Chamber of Commerce at the Wigwam Resort. Also in April of 1988, future NFL Hall of Famer Randall McDaniel was drafted by the Minnesota Vikings. McDaniel was a graduate of Agua Fria High School in Avondale and ASU. In 1989, another Avondale native, Laddie Coor, was named president of Arizona State University, becoming one of the highest paid university presidents in the nation. Tolleson High School student Nick Heisong set a state record in the pole vault at 16 feet 7 inches. 10 years later, he would vault 19 feet 4.5 inches to win a gold medal at the Sydney Olympics. The so-called White Elephant of the Desert, also known as the Phoenix Trotting Track and the Goodyear Equestrian Center, hosted circuses and horse shows. The completion of I-10 in August 1990 opened the West Valley to even more development. The landscape changed and continues to change to this day.